the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Elizabeth Barnard. Just 7 days ago, we were on such a high after beating Wolves 3-0. We totally dispatched them. The mood couldn't have been better, and now it couldn't be a more different story. Fulham sit in 15th, 1 point above the relegation zone after an insipid 2-0 defeat away at Everton. The positives to take from Saturday do look quite thin on the ground, but we're going to try. The pot's going to be a mixture of probably quite a lot of group therapy and maybe, just maybe, trying to look for some good news around the corner. And my star-studded panel today is all fresh back from Liverpool on Saturday. First of all, welcome Dan Cooke. How did you enjoy your weekend?
Actually, I had a really nice weekend. Drove up Saturday morning, joined you guys for some lunch and some drinks, sort of halfway to the ground from the city centre. Went back, had a few drinks and some dinner in Liverpool. Sunday, mooched about a bit, enjoyed the delights of Liverpool and the Wirral. I had a really nice weekend, actually.
Just a shame about 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday, I guess. Yasmin, we were sat next to each other during the game, and then you went on a big night out on the town. Are you just about recovered from your night out in Liverpool?
It's honestly going to take me a while, I think. Today I'm feeling even more tired than yesterday, if that's possible. But it was a great night out, really enjoyed it. And I was so happy to be back at the football, so happy to be back with Fulham fans. I feel so isolated. I've been at uni for the last 2 months and no one wants to hear me talk about Fulham. So I was so excited to be back and actually able to talk about it without someone rolling their eyes.
It's good to hear that we all have the same experiences among our groups of non-Fulham friends of trying to talk about Fulham and everyone rolling their eyes. And finally, we got Avais on the panel today. Avais, how are you doing today?
I'm all right, Liz. I'm all right. I've recovered from what felt like an eternity on the motorway. So like Dan, I drove up on the Saturday, but I made the really wise decision of driving back on the Saturday as well. And when you travel to away games by yourself, certainly in a car, there are some dark thoughts when you have a game like we experienced. So I'm glad to be home in one piece. And on the Sunday, to be fair, I went to a first birthday party, so that was quite nice. Great way to get away from the dredge that was that Saturday. So yeah, I'm all good. How about yourself, Liz? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I loved my time up in Liverpool, actually, despite the game. So feeling positive about that. And obviously new stadium, which we will definitely talk about. But before we do all of that, Avais, I believe you've got some 3-word reviews for us.
Yeah, so I've got a caveat that a lot of these three-word reviews, whether it's from Instagram or X, have a lot of puns about the stadium names. I've avoided those as much as I could because they are very apt, but probably not good enough for the podcast name. So Rick Card has come along with a Dickensian nightmare, which I thought was really, really apt. Jakob, friend of the pod, with Our Worst Enemies, and Jay Sampson with what I thought really does sum up how I felt after the game. Awful, dreadful, abysmal. And those are the three I thought were the highlights.
Oh yeah, goodness. I can imagine that there wasn't a lot of positivity in those replies on X and Instagram at 5 p.m. on Saturday. Before we get into the game, I'd love to start by talking about our experience at the Hill Dickinson. We were all up there on Saturday and obviously our first time at the new stadium. I'll kick us off. I had a great time. I loved the new stadium. I loved where it's positioned. I loved it by the Docklands. Dan, how did it compare to Goodison for you?
Really different. Really different vibes. I feel like on the approach to the Hill Dickinson, which I thought really stood out, is the fact that you can just see it from such a way out. And it builds up a lovely anticipation of getting there when, the last 25 minutes of your walk you can see exactly where you're headed, whereas Goodison, it felt more hidden, like it was tucked away, it was in between all the houses, it sort of just like sprung up on you, and then when you're inside it's like polar opposites, and neither are better or worse than the other, they're just different, and I love both. I was a big fan of Goodison, but I was really surprised at how much I really enjoyed being inside that stadium on Saturday. One of those grounds where I was sat, great view, not too low, not too high, but also you just felt like you were in amongst it. I feel like at the Spurs ground, great stadium, but I don't feel as like connected to what's going on the pitch. But it's something about the Hill Dickinson felt very much like you were in the action, in the game. I really liked it. I thought it was a really, really good stadium. I think there is an argument to be said that it's still a bit like, it lacks a bit of character, maybe. Like, the concourse is fairly standard concrete. The stadium itself is just a bit of that standard shape of that bowl. But I think as like a viewing experience, great big screen for replays, great view of the pitch, safe standing, lots of room, like that, loads of positives. And actually, just, I think you and Sammy spoke about it in the quick take, it was a subdued atmosphere, but when actually the atmosphere kicked in, it felt like a stadium that had been designed for acoustics. Like, it was loud. It was really loud.
Yeah, Avais, do you agree about that atmosphere? Like the way that it picked up in that second half?
When unfortunately we were on the Kosh and Everton were all over us, you could hear the noise all around us. And as Dan says, you can tell the acoustics were designed to retain that sound because it was so loud, so audible. And you could also hear them quite easily, what they were saying, what they were singing, what they were chanting. And it's a fantastic stadium. And I think the view is particularly what I really enjoyed compared to the Spurs stadium, where you're situated in a very similar spot within the stadium, but it feels like you're slightly like further back in the Spurs away block compared to where we were here. You felt engulfed in the stadium. You still also felt really close to the players that were there, as much as still having that view of the far end of the pitch. But I also liked you could see the far end of the pitch were easily. You could see where the viewing replays were. The tannoy was excellent, and I really like the approach as well, because unlike the other newer stadiums, although it does look like a bowl, you can see Hill Dickinson Stadium, like the sign from far away as well, and it doesn't look like the average stadium. Like, you compare it to like the Santiago now, Bernabeu now, it's such a monotonous chromed coloured dome. This one has patterns to it, has texture to it, and it's a really nice approach, and like inside stadium was great. I had a bar the football, I had a really good experience there.
And Yasmin, you making it 4 for 4 and fans of the new Everton Stadium?
I am a fan. I mean, I feel like I need to balance it out slightly, because I personally, the only thing I would say about it was that it's still a stadium which I would not like. I'm still very happy with the Cottage as our own, because as much as you are both like completely right, when you're in there for such a big new stadium, you do feel very intimate with the players and the actual game which is going on, but I still feel quite removed from the rest of the people in the ground, I would say. Like the big gangways in between where fans are sat, I like, feeling like everything is very, very tight and close and intimate. What I did like about the ground, though, because it obviously is great, is it felt like a Liverpool City ground. Like, obviously, I know you've also got Liverpool Football Club in the city as well, but Bramley Moor Dock and the walk up to it, it felt like I was in Liverpool. I liked, as much as maybe the actual ground itself doesn't have amazing, vast amounts of character, the area around it does. And in that sort of enclosed spot before you actually enter the ground, you've got the old warehouses and the brick buildings that have been left just outside of the ground. I did really like that as well, but obviously would much rather the Cottage.
Oh, well, of course. 100 days out of 100 every day of the week.
I'll also still argue, like, ultimately what would I prefer is probably I'd rather go to Goodison. Just like as an overall, I don't know, just the way, as Yasmin says, everything's on top of you at grounds like that, and it's the same at Craven Cottage. Like, I don't know, think like Portman Road as well, like Ipswich, all of those sort of old style grounds where they've done their best to get as much seating as possible into a ground that was originally not designed for that, leads to something a lot more immersive and fun. But like, I've been to loads of new grounds that I've thought are pretty soulless, and I'm not that bothered by going back to. But I think the Hill Dickinson's probably the first one, maybe barring Spurs, that's sort of broken that trend of new stadiums that just don't quite hit the mark.
I guess we do actually have to move on to the game, unfortunately. I would love to spend the whole hour talking about our experience at Everton away. So we'll start with talking about that lineup, which dropped, obviously, just before the game. Dan, you spoke last week about the midfield pivot and whether we need the stability of Lukic and Berger in every game. Obviously, against Wolves at home, we very clearly didn't, and it worked really well that we didn't have both of them playing. But obviously, that pivot is also sometimes essential to provide more solidity. But having said that, it can stifle us. So it's a difficult balance. When that lineup dropped, were you surprised? And do you think, with hindsight, that the right decisions were made?
I wasn't surprised. I think I spoke about it last week that Everton was a real litmus test. Like, Everton away is one of those things where some people will, in their minds, they'll prefer the stability. Some people will want us to keep that attacking impetus. And ultimately, I didn't know which way Marco was going to fall on it. And I didn't mind either way. I was happy with either option. But in hindsight, I was wrong. Like, I was wrong. Anyone else who had the same line as me was unfortunately wrong, because we just ceded all control of this football game from the first minute by what has to be said, given everything that's happened and what we saw last week, was a negative starting 11. It was a team that was not designed to go out and take the game to Everton, get on top of them, go for it. It was a team that was designed to sit in, try and deal with the opposition's strengths rather than capitalise on our own. And I think it didn't work. Also, and I've seen people saying on Twitter, and I wish I could remember which people have said it, but we talk a lot, and I've spoken a lot about the control the additional control you get by having Sander Berge and Sasha Lukic and the work they do out of possession. They didn't help us. They didn't protect us. You know, we were still defensively vulnerable, but we also therefore just had nothing else going forward because they're not those sort of players. So I think it was really wrong. I think we now need to move away from it because it's not working for us. And I think the big thing, and I'm sure we'll speak about it at length, Josh King has not put in a single performance this season, I think, that warrants being dropped. And I understand needing to manage minutes for a youngster who's getting his first real go at the Premier League. But he's also been, barring maybe a couple of games where Cess has got man of the match, he has been our best player in every game. And I don't see many other teams that would drop a player in those situations. And I think we've got to stop with it now. I think he's just got to play because we are always better when he's in that number 10 slot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll come on to King when we talk about the second half because he did come in and make an impact in the second half.
And just to keep going on it as well, is Alex Iwobi in the 10 as well, which I didn't mind seeing because everything about him says he can play there. He has played there. I didn't mind it as an option. It's the only way that you can keep Kevin in that side and not play Alex Iwobi in the 8 is really to play him in the 10. It's the worst I've seen him play. And actually, I wouldn't even say the worst I've seen him play. I didn't see him play in that first half. Like, he was never on... It's the first time in a Fulham shirt where I've seen Alex Iwobi not get on the ball. And that was a problem because you take the one person that we rely on most to try and make things happen, try and be creative and forward thinking, and the game just sort of happened around him. And so he got bypassed when we didn't have the ball, and when we did have the ball, it never seemed to arrive at his feet. So it was a twofold thing that didn't work. Not only have you taken Josh King out, but you've killed Alex Iwobi a little bit as well.
I think it speaks for the imbalance that midfield had in the end, because I was looking at Sander Berge and I saw a certain patterns with him that I really was waiting for Cottage Tactico to describe in his threads after every game, and he really emphasised what I noticed is that Sander Berge also had the game bypass him. He didn't, because Lukic was so active and all over Dewsbury Hall, it left Berge almost redundant. He didn't know whether to go forward or to stay back, and so he didn't know whether he should join the press or not when Everton had the ball. And so again, just like Iwobi, the game bypassed him both when we were trying to press, but also when we were defensive. He would also overcorrect and go too deep. And so when they would cut the ball back to the top D and the midfielders would collect the ball, he was nowhere to be found then either. So as bad as Iwobi was in terms of his positioning and knowing what his role was, Berge seemed to be a bit lost as well. And then on top of that, Lukic getting, I think, relatively harshly booked within 10 minutes really stifled his capability of being a nuisance. And as a result, those three midfielders became ineffective as a combination. And it just, as we watched the game progress in that first half, it just bypassed them entirely. Our press was ineffective. They probably took 2 or 3 passes to go from their right back to their left winger. we were scrambling, we were chasing shadows the entire game, and it really spoke for like the scrambled nature of our attitude and our performance ultimately, because we weren't really scrappy, we weren't intense, we didn't win second balls. There was very little in that first half, certainly, that you could put your hat on and think, okay, well, at least that's going well for us, that we could draw some positives from. That first half was so dire because we had nothing cohesive going forward or defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struggling to find anything to talk about that went positively in that first half that I can ask any of you guys about, because it was just so bad. Yasmin, I wanted to ask you about Lukic. In my opinion, he was very lucky not to be sent off in this game. I thought the yellow card at 10 minutes was fair enough. And there was another challenge later on where realistically, I think he probably should have had a second yellow. He has got a yellow card, though, and that will mean that he misses the game against Sunderland, which will mean, I assume, that Iwobi has to work with Sander Berge. Is this a big miss for Fulham, or maybe is this a bit of a blessing in disguise that we'll have to go for a more attacking midfield duo?
Yeah, I mean, it will be difficult to try and see this game as an isolated game or as more of like an example of a greater issue which is going on with Fulham at the moment. I mean, with seeing the lineup, and the same with Dan and Avais, like I didn't really have a strong opinion as to whether I wanted Berge and Lukic in this team either way, but I think it's the same thing. In hindsight, Lukic had the same problem that Iwobi did as well, in that he, out of Berge and Lukic, Lukic is the more creative, attacking looking player, and he was suffocated and constricted in the same way that Iwobi was as well, because when you look back at Everton as a team that we were going up against, who are relying so heavily on control and directness, like I guess is exactly the same reason why we put in Berge and Lukic, when you've got Keane and Tarkowski at the back, such strong centre-backs, that we were both two teams that were trying to control the game, and obviously we were going to be outmuscled by the likes of Keane and Tarkowski. I think he was lucky. Lukic was lucky to stay on the pitch. Personally, I said that to you because Elizabeth, we were sat next to each other, and as soon as that possible second yellow went past, I turned to you and said, I think he's lucky there. The first one was an absolute yellow against Dewsbury Hall. So slightly wrestled to the ground. I think the second one, Dewsbury Hall goes down relatively easily, but Lukic is still the wrong side of him. He makes no attempt to get the ball. And in any other situation, if he wasn't already on a yellow, that would have been a yellow and I wouldn't have had too many complaints. That's the thing. So I do think he was lucky. I think he will be a miss, but I think it's a good opportunity to force Marco Silva to make a decision. It's like, he won't have to make a decision now. Decision is made for him. He can't play Berge and Lukic. So this problem of trying to work out whether to start Berge and Lukic is going to be solved for him. People have obviously been asking for a change. This is when this change is going to be forced to come in.
Yeah, Dan, Everton then managed to put the ball in the back of the net twice. Both goals were disallowed for offside. It was really hard to tell in the stadium how close it was. Both were checked by VAR. Watching them back, both fair enough, but definitely some warning shots for Fulham. Meanwhile, Fulham were offering absolutely nothing down the other end. Were you getting really concerned at this point about both our defensive weakness and our attacking output?
This is the concern, isn't it? It's the fact that it's in either direction, and any side really, you've got to be good at one. Like, pick a speciality, and if you can't do both, pick one to be good at. And I think that therefore comes back to this team selection of, like, if we're not going to win games 1-0 because our defence is not going to be rigid enough and it's not going to be tough enough to break down that you can rely on keeping clean sheets, then you can't put out a side that is at best going to create one goal-scoring chance a game. And I was very concerned, and you know, I was sandwiched in between my dad and Sammy James, and all three of us were just very withdrawn. You felt very the team were passive. I felt very passive. It felt like all the energy had just been sucked out of us as fans because we had nothing to just gee ourselves up for. And I think we should know the way that Everton are going to hurt us. And I'm not boiling them down to being exclusively this sort of team, because actually they created chances in other ways. They could have scored goals in other ways. But when a team is so consistently able to just stand the ball up to the back post and have the confidence that Michael Keane and James Tarkowski can stick around in the penalty area for as long as they like while an attack's going on, in the hope that they get on across because they're not worried about what's going back the other way, that's really concerning. And it felt like one of those halves of football where something's wrong and something's got to change, because there was nothing Fulham in a positive way about that first half. You can say it was a very Fulham performance because we were, we allowed the opposition to get on top of us. We didn't fight back. We looked a bit lethargic. But when I say there was nothing Fulham about it, there was no trademark. This is what we do it well, and we're going to go out and do it. There was none of those patterns of play that we're used to seeing. It just felt like a team that didn't really know what the plan was. That's kind of scary.
It is scary. Avais, when the goal came just before the break, it felt really inevitable. We'd been riding our luck. It was only a matter of time. It was Gueye who ended up putting the ball in the back of the net after quite a bit of pinball in the area. It was honestly a mess to watch. A mess to watch back. I've seen some people saying that Anderson should have done better there, but I wanted to ask you, do you think any of our defenders or Leno is responsible for that goal?
When I watched it back, I actually thought Iwobi let Gueye run past him to have that open space to actually strike the ball. So when the ball came into the far post and there was a bit of a melee after the header, Anderson gets wrong-footed because the striker miskicks the ball or hits it against himself or whatever. What on earth he did, I couldn't tell. But that ball then falls to a space where Gueye, you can watch it from an angle where he's running onto the ball with literally no Fulham players aware that he's running onto the ball. Iwobi had let him go behind him early on when the ball first crossed in. And I think Iwobi was a little bit unaware, just like Dan was saying. He seemed like someone who wasn't sure what his role was in that defensive setup. All of our defence were at the back post because we know that's what Everton were trying to do. But this left Gueye completely open to smash the ball in the net. And as you say, it was inevitable. They scored twice before. The marginal offsides didn't warn us enough to be more robust in our defensive structure. And it was quite disappointing because if we got to half-time having got away with not conceding a goal, you could think, okay, we could regroup, and certainly with the substitutions we'll get onto, that could have given us a bit of some impetus and say, look, we were completely in this game at 0-0. We got away with that first half, but it was a deflating moment to concede a goal in essentially the 50th minute of first half, and it just spoke for what happened in the second half really, because we had nothing really to answer for after that.
Well, I think one of the things that really strikes me about that goal, we don't score that goal down the other end. And the reason why is because where does it come from? It comes from a centre-back winning the header, being up in the box, outside of a set-piece scenario, really. He stayed up. But it then falls to the first of their two more defensively minded midfielders inside our own 6-yard box, and then is followed up by the other one. Would you ever see both Sander Berge and Sasha Lukic in the pocket that Tim Iroegbunam and Idrissa Gana Gueye picked up there? No. But they got bodies into the box. They had a game plan. Bodies in the box. Get it in the box. And it worked. And it's weird to me that we've stopped doing that, because we used to do that. And that used to be our USP. That used to be our plan of attack. And right now, other than a little bit of brilliance or a decent breakaway where there was one chance in the first half for Raul, we weren't troubling that Everton back line. We didn't have the numbers to trouble them.
And what's frustrating about that as well is that someone like Sander Berge is more than capable of striking an 18-yarder, a 20-yarder. He's done it against us. And yet the times when he's on the edge of the box, even on Saturday, he chose an easy pass, or a misplaced pass in most cases, when a shot on goal, even if it doesn't go in, completely changes the mindset of that defence, because they know that we're capable of doing such a thing. They'll come towards them trying to block it, create some space behind them for us to then work the ball around and actually create alternative ways of trying to get shots on target. By being so predictable, by having the ball always go to our wings to try and create crosses along the ground, we are so utterly predictable. But the trouble with that also is that we're slow in doing so. We'll also look at the player that we're going to pass to, we'll hesitate to do the pass, and then still then do it. And from the stands you can see, exactly what we're going to do or try to do. So of course the analysis from the opposition is going to be, well, that's all they do, left-sided build-up, try and quickly get over to the right-hand side if they're able to. And so you add that to the fact that we were so nervous in the back. Like, we got pressed to death in that second half to the point where we couldn't get out of our own box. The two together with a disjointed midfield just really spoke for how awful that game was. It only really changed on the substitutions at the hour mark when Muniz came on. Did we have a bit more joy, but even that was short-lived in the end.
This is why the fan base get so excited. Well, first of all, when Muniz came in, and then when Kevin came into the squad as well, is that those are two players that suddenly shifted the outlook of Fulham as a side. Kevin, for once, we had a winger who had the confidence and the skill to be able to take on their man. We hadn't seen that in ages, and he added that key element of unpredictability where. You're completely right, Avais. It's so easy for an opposition's analysis to look at what we're going to do, make a plan and implement it. There's no way we're going to go into a different decision there. Whereas Kevin, that was where the excitement was. The problem with Kevin, and you did see it quite a lot yesterday, was that he's very skillful in possession. He's nifty, he's skillful, he's sleek, but then he just doesn't have that maturity or ability to be able to then, where's that ball then going to go? It's what he then does with it, which then is either a loopy shot that goes miles over the crossbar or a cross which is ultimately doesn't find a player. But that's why Kevin was so exciting. But Elizabeth, you said this in the quick take, and that's exactly what I'm thinking as well, is where is that command coming from for Berger not to take those opportunities? Like, I cannot understand, and you said this, Elizabeth, I cannot understand why he wouldn't want to. Surely you would want to, unless there is a very strict command coming from above not to.
It does concern me, for sure. We'll move past the first half. I think we probably should for all of our sakes. And on to those substitutions then. Dan, you mentioned how much we miss King in the first half. He came on at half-time. And then at 58 minutes, Marco Silva brought on Muniz and Chukwueze. I've been feeling personally like substitutions, when we're so down and out as we were away at Everton, are just coming too late. There was no reason not to make that triple substitution at half-time. We basically are discarding the first 10, 15 minutes of second halves. Do you agree? And talk to me about the impact of, especially I think, Muniz and King when they came off the bench.
I think I actually do semi-disagree. Just because you need to leave something in the tank, I always feel. And like I didn't mind it because I thought initially it did work, maybe for the first 5 minutes. And substitutions can be iterative, right? We were building something there. We've hit third gear by bringing Josh King on, and then you leave yourself room to go into fourth and fifth by then bringing on a fresh centre forward, bringing on a fresh winger. So I didn't necessarily mind that. I think you make 3 substitutions at half time. You don't leave yourself with much to then go to in the second half. But I do where I do agree is then when you see the impact that Rodrigo Muniz makes, you see the impact that Chukwueze and Josh King make. If we'd have had 15 more minutes of that impact, we probably could have got back into that game, because when they came on, that was the best football we played by a distance. And Marco Silva said it himself. He said effectively we played 20 minutes of football in that game, and it was the 20 minutes that those 3 subs were able to have an impact on. You got Josh King desperate to get on the ball, turning, driving at the opposition back line. You had Samuel Chukwueze just a little bit of a different. He's able to go left, he's able to go right. He'll take his man on. And then Rodrigo Muniz, a proper centre forward to play around. I don't know what was up with Raul on Saturday. I think he's just gassed. I think he looked shattered. And suddenly you threw on the ball of energy that Rodrigo is, and the hold-up play that he's brought into his game so brilliantly since he joined. It just gave us so much more threat. And we were, at that point, when Rodrigo had that chance that was saved by Pickford, I felt really confident that we were actually going to get something out of the game. I really thought, I was like, here we go. This is way more like it. And actually, this is what we saw against Wolves. And it's another justification for the fact that you need to be having a midfield that probably has both Josh King and Alex Iwobi in it. we're cooking. And then obviously what happens. But I think that was proof enough to me that 15-minute spell, that if you drop Alex Iwobi a little bit deeper into the number 8, I thought he looked far better for that period of the game. You get your best player on the pitch, who he is our player of the season so far. He has been our best player so far, Josh King, and you get a bit of energy up top. We're suddenly quite good at football again.
Avais, Sammy and I spoke on the Quick Take about Fulham's only real bright spot of the game, that Muniz chance. I think personally, now watching it back, that we were a little harsh. We both said, oh, Muniz has to be doing better there, has to be scoring. It is at an angle. It's a slightly difficult chance. What do you think?
I think at the time, I thought, yeah, he had to have scored, or at least made it harder for Pickford to save it. 'Cause our perspective was that from where we're sitting, it seemed a lot closer to the goal than I think the actual replay showed. So when you watch it back, you think, actually, he's quite far out, and he's done well to make Pickford stretch for it, albeit with his legs. And like so easy to say in hindsight, we'll just lift it a little bit and it would have gone over his leg, but in the heat of the moment. But I was so excited, just like Dan was saying, for that 15-minute spell where we had moves where Muniz was chesting the ball down for Josh King and turning and sprinting towards the goal, and Josh King was like beating a man and like showing his quality on the ball. It was so exciting. And it was almost like, imagine having a number 8 like Iwobi, who can collect the ball deep and actually progress the ball creatively, I should say. And we can actually play and ball out a little bit. And it was just so frustrating that Muniz got injured there. But it does speak for the fact that if with a bit of a robust squad from a striker perspective, we can still do something here. The worry really is, how bad is that Muniz injury? He came off after playing maybe 20 minutes. You don't do that unless there's something that he can't sort of run off or recover from. And hopefully the 2 weeks from now, where the international break can settle everyone down, we can see how bad this injury is and what we can do about it. But the worry also is, if he's not fit necessarily for Sunderland, and Raul seems like a bit gassed but also not fully fit, hasn't trained properly according to Marco over the last fair few sessions, does that leave us with Jonah Kusari to play? Very much doubt it. So what does that mean? I don't want to see Adama as a striker. I don't want to see Adama on the right wing, quite frankly. But you guys all know what I think of him too much. But then also, like, Chukwueze played centrally, and also, I mean, like, we were deflated by that stage, but he seemed like a ball of energy. Potentially could start as a striker, and then you could have Harry on one side, you could have Kevin on the other. There are options, not ideal options, but there's a lot of work to be done over this international break to see where we stand. But if we can bottle that 15 minutes and have that positive energy over the course of 60 minutes, I think it's going to give us a lot of reassurance that this is not the doom and gloom that we all felt leaving the stadium on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to look at it, I think. And hopefully the international break will allow Muniz a chance to get back to fitness, and allow a little bit of a chance to regroup and figure out what we're doing when that striking partnership is not working up top. Yasmin, to add insult to injury a bit, then Everton score another goal. It's a great corner from Dewsbury Hall, who had an absolutely electric game, and the whole time we were all thinking what could have been if he came to Fulham. And then Michael Keane gets his head on it. Everton are a team with a great physical presence and great physical players, so it's hardly a surprise that they turned up on set pieces. But does our defending from them concern you at all?
I mean, obviously, yes, but I actually think that the second goal is, of all the offsides, and the first goal is the one that I'm least concerned about. I thought it was a very good corner from Dewsbury Hall. Annoyingly, had a brilliant game on Saturday as well, considering that we were looking at him. Just on Dewsbury Hall as well. Like he was just someone who was always willing to run, always willing to find space, and his skill was brilliant in his set pieces. They were direct, they were precise, and there was a slight little curve on that corner as well that was perfectly low. It literally landed perfectly for Keane. Iwobi lets Keane go too easily, in my opinion. Keane is able to come round Iwobi and get into the right position. That should be more difficult. But it is a good header / shoulder from Keane to get it up and over Leno. There's not really much else he can do. It's annoying to concede from yet another corner, I will say that. But I think it's not just the corner, it was general set pieces from the entire game that Fulham really struggled to deal with. Mikolenko long throw-ins as well that always ended up on Keane's head in some way. That was the third offside goal. Was that, I think, was a Mikolenko long throw to Keane. I don't think it's the one that I'm most worried about, but it was really disappointing. And as soon as that second goal went in, that was it. And we were just waiting for the game to be over. It kind of passed me by that point, but I was sat back, leaning on my chair, thinking, when is this going to end? Because Muniz had already gone off. Our 20 minutes of football had already finished. And that was just, like you said, Elizabeth, adding insult to injury.
Yeah, I mean, it was that and obviously the Adama sub that came before it that just killed it for Fulham. Muniz is such a spark for us off the bench. And when he came off, I knew it was never going to be any other way. Dan, the football content cycle is incredibly reactive. Not only us on Fulhamish and club podcasts, but generally neutral journalists and commentators react, week by week. There's enough to feed it. I read a very interesting piece by Michael Cox in The Athletic this morning about how Fulham are basically in a season of woe and how terrible we have generally been and how we haven't really been that convincing at all. And he says it's odd because nothing has changed really for Fulham since last season. We got basically the same players. We lost Andreas Pereira, and we've got the same manager, and we've, if anything, upgraded our squad, albeit not enough, a lot of people feel. But he argues that the Premier League now is about territory and set pieces, and Fulham have just not been able to adapt at all to reflect that. Do you agree? Is that your main concern with what happens? Or do you think we're perhaps slightly overreacting to a very bad result and performance?
I don't think we're overreacting. And I did think it was an interesting article. And it has been the story of the Premier League so far this season, right? These first 11 games is about getting the ball forward, creating set-piece opportunities, capitalising on those. I think where Fulham are struggling is I see us trying to conform to that, and I don't think we have a squad that can conform to that, which leaves me thinking, instead of trying to play the game that everyone else is playing, but with players who can't do it, I think we should be differentiating ourselves. We should be trying to do things in the way that we have been over previous few seasons. And the thing that I'm coming back to is this loss of identity. I feel like Fulham don't have a concise, simple way for me to describe how we play football this season. And I think that is a real problem, because you look through all the teams who are doing well this season and you can succinctly say what they are good at. I can't find it with Fulham at the moment. And last season before that, it was very easy. We're a team that works it well out wide, overload with fullbacks flying up, get the ball into the box, create opportunities. We're not doing that this season. That's stopped. We're not piling balls into the box. We're not getting men in there trying to get on the end of crosses. And that's fine. I'm fine for us to try and evolve and change into something different. But it's sort of like we haven't found something different. We've just stopped doing what we were good at. It's not suddenly we're creating a lot of opportunity through central areas. We're not getting strikers or wingers who are getting in behind back lines and creating threat that way. It just feels like we're starting to try and mould ourselves into being a team that can compete in the same way that Everton did on Saturday. We wanted to try and be solid and then trust in your attacking flair players to make things happen up the pitch. But they had so much more definition and so much more understanding within their squad of how to do that they execute it brilliantly, and we don't. And I think this is where these next couple of weeks are vital. This international break is seriously important, because Marco needs to find that identity. He needs to decide what sort of team are we? Are we going to decide to be a team that drops an extra centre-back in, plays five at the back, and tries to thrive off quick wingers, get the ball forward quickly and operate that way? Are we going to go the other way and try and become more aggressive with the ball, try and have 60 to 70% possession in games and force teams back? But right now, if you look through on Saturday, we had 50% possession, We took a few shots from in and around the area, all spread out without much cohesion in how those opportunities came about. There's not enough plan there. And because I don't think we can become a set-piece side, because we don't have great set-piece takers, and also we don't seem to have set-piece threat in the box. I don't know what it is. Like, in my mind, Joachim Andersen should be scoring a decent number of goals a season based on his physical profile. Sander Berg as well, 6'4", he should be winning headers in the area. And then we've got two strikers in Raul and Rodrigo who are very proficient with their head. But we've not seen enough of it to suggest that we can be a set-piece side. We've got to find other ways of scoring goals.
Just about sums it up, doesn't it?
It's a really interesting point that you make, Dad, because it all speaks to what I'm worried about Marco. He seems completely befuddled in his own mind. It seems like this season in particular, he's gone into such a negative headspace. He's been so angry, so much more than we're used to. Where before he'd be passionate and almost angry to a point, but controlled to some degree, bar the Old Trafford FA Cup incident. He has that same element of controlling, or justifiable anger, I should say. But it seems like progressively over this season, he's found it harder to control his emotions, control his anger, his frustrations. And it feels like that's stemmed, at least for me, since January, where we're in an unbelievably good position to potentially kick on, push on for Europe, get a couple of signings and risk something from a transfer perspective and see where we ended up. And that stifled ambition really seems to have stifled him. He's then gone into this negative mindset where it's clouding his judgment this season over how ambitious to be, how forward-thinking to be. And by being more negative, the cliche is that your team's playing the image of your manager. And I think it's no truer than the Marco Silva of this season, where he's become more negative, he's become more recluse, more frustrated with the fact that he hasn't got the signings that he wanted. He can't seem to get over that fact. And as a result, that negativity is brought onto the pitch. We were so passive, so afraid to do anything risky. And when we did, they were awful decisions, like Anderson in the first half was playing the ball more to Everton players than our own. We got pressed to death in that second half because we're too scared to take a risk and beat the press. All comes to thoughts that we haven't really got cohesion. We've got such negativity amongst how we play football, such nervousness and lack of confidence about us. And for the first time, I saw Marco a bit more down than I remember him being on the sidelines, where normally he's reprimanding his players or the fourth official. He just seemed to be within himself, and it was really interesting that other than Tete and Ryan Sessegnon, he was the only other one that really made a purposeful attempt to come and clap us after the game. And it felt like an apology, almost as if he knew that there was something not quite right, and that he wanted us to know that he knows that enough to fix it. And it's the first time I've truly worried about him from a mindset point of view and how that looks forward going with Fulham. And hopefully it does mean, as you say, Dan, he's got these 2 weeks to sit himself down, have a refresh, have a rethink of what these tactics are, how we build up, because at the moment it's only going one way. That sense of negativity is just really brewing amongst us and therefore and the players and therefore the club as a whole. And as much as he was at fault for Saturday in his lineup, in his tactics and things, it does speak for a wider issue with our recruitment, the timing of our recruitment, how the owners work and how they look to try and improve this squad. But I really hope that Marco can use these 2 weeks, like you're saying, Dan, just to refresh himself from a personal perspective as much as from a footballing perspective for us.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of questions about coaching in part 2, so we'll bring part 1 to an end here. See you in a second. Welcome back to the Fulhamish podcast. It's still me, Elizabeth, here with Dan, Avais and Yasmin. We've got a load of questions that have come in. Thank you so much to everyone who's got in touch. I've taken them all from X today. And there's quite a lot of frustration and there's quite an upset sentiment. I think the ones that stood out to me were the ones about coaching. So we'll start with those. Yasmin, this is potentially a bit of a hot potato to pass you. But, I love to do that. This is from Patrick Brown, but this sentiment has been reflected elsewhere across the replies. Would it be a complete panic stations to use the international break to sack Marco and bring in a replacement?
No. I don't think we should be sacking Marco Silva. I also was thinking anyway, I'm not at the panic stations. What I will say though, and I said this to Dan at the weekend, is I do have this fear, and it's a bleak reality, that with teams like Fulham, there is a 5-year cycle average of staying in the Premier League or having structure and stability in the Premier League. You look at the relegation zone now, West Ham, Wolves, Forest, we're teetering on it as well, obviously, at the moment. And that's the fear I have. It's not Marco. I still think he's the correct man for the job. I think there's an air of negativity, but the word Avais used, brewing, I think is completely appropriate. It's brewing. We're not imploding as a squad at the moment. What's so frustrating about Everton is that our win against Wolves was so direct, so confident, so sure. We seem so sure of ourselves. Wolves is a great game to win, but it was also an easy game to win on paper. We should have been winning it. As a standalone game, it's not enough to change the mindset of the coaching and the players. It needs to then be followed on by a win, Everton away. That would have been brilliant. That would have no one would have been commenting about injuries. No one would have been commenting about Marco if we had won at the weekend. Sunderland then would have been a perfect opportunity at home to then pick it up and go and move further on and push on till Christmas. And all of a sudden, it's not a problem anymore because Crystal Palace were having this exact same issue last year and they pipped us to Europe. So it doesn't have to be an issue, but I think that's why the loss on Saturday and the manner in which we lost it was so disappointing. I don't think it's panic stations yet. But I think there's definitely an air of being wary about the situation that we're in and not letting it get too deep. Because then I think we go up to Burnley away as well, don't we, start of December? And that could be challenging. That was challenging last season. That was 2-2, wasn't it? And that was disappointing. That was frustrating. So it's dangerous, but it's not panic stations, in my opinion.
Yeah, we got a question from James Gleick, which is how hard do we push the panic button? And it seems, Yasmin, that you're saying we're not jamming it just yet. Maybe we're just giving it a little tickle and seeing what's going on. Dan, I've got one from you, from Sarah Keeg, also about the coaching. And she asks, do you think losing Boamorte and then Stuart Gray is having a bigger impact than we thought it would? Obviously, we talk about players and Marco, but we rarely, if ever, talk about members of the coaching staff and the support that they might provide to him.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, but I distinctly remember speaking about Stuart Gray before. We did this a few years ago when things were bad and Stuart Gray had moved out of the coaching staff and he then came back in and our defence improved and everyone pinned on him, and he is no doubt a fantastic coach. And Louis Boamorte, exactly the same. I don't think so. I think there are I can pinpoint so many other areas of issues that Fulham have that I would focus on fixing way before looking down to the coach who is working with our back line or Marco's right-hand man. There are other issues at play here that take precedence over that. Does it help? I'm sure it doesn't. When you factor all of those things in, plus that on top, it's not going to be beneficial for us. But I think I don't think it's the major reason. And this defence has been poor, and I think there needs to be some serious conversations. And there's a guy on Twitter, Joe O'Brien, who I think is banging the right drum a lot of the time. That we talk a lot about our inability to create chances, to score goals at the moment this season. But he's right when he says we don't have a defence that we can trust enough that if we're unable to score, at least we'll get a point and get a 0-0 draw. And that's a problem as well, because there are teams that will be able to do that this season. They will be able to get over the line just by virtue of being rigid enough. Everton, I think, are a great example. Everton will get 0-0 draws here and there, and you just chop up streaks of games where you're like, we could have lost 3 on the bounce here, but in between those two we toughed it out, we got a 0-0 draw, we take a point, and you just break that bad momentum. So yes, it would be great to have Stuart Gray marshalling this back line, but I also think that we need to be looking at the individual players and asking questions of them specifically. Why are these issues happening? Why are we making these mistakes? And ultimately, if they're unable to cut it out, you have to let other people try and do their job for them. Because whilst I don't think... I'd confidently say that I think Joachim Andersen as a whole is a better footballer and a better centre-back than Issa Diop. I've seen Issa Diop have more good games this season than I've seen Joachim Andersen have good games. Likewise with Calvin Bassey and Jorge Cuenca. It's all well and good having your favourites and players that intuitively you think they're better. And there are other teams having these issues. I saw a really interesting conversation about Newcastle and Eddie Howe. He's got his favourites. He's got the old guard who have served him really well and seen his club grow into one that is now in its second Champions League campaign. But they're faltering at the moment because he's struggling to move away from players who maybe now need to be taking a back seat. And I think Marco's struggling with that at the moment as well. He's reluctant to sit people on the bench because they had a great season last year, or for 2 or 3 years they've been a key cog in this side. If it's not working, you've got to change it. You can't just stick by it.
Avais, I've got a question for you along those lines from Rob on X. A lot of praise has been given to our defenders' ability individually, but it seems as a unit that they can't stop any opposing forwards. Where does the club go from here?
It's a great question, and something that we've all been tearing our hair out of. And when we beat Wolves with a clean sheet, it was the first clean sheet, other than Leeds, obviously, since March against Tottenham. It's been a bit of a farce that, as Dan was saying, that you can't grind out 0-0s or even like 1-1s to a degree. We're always waiting for that one mistake that tends to be the reason why we concede late, or that vital goal against us. And the frustration really with it is that we have Lukic and Berger playing as two defensive midfielders in front of them, who are supposedly meant to be screening that. So if we're setting up so negatively, and it's supposedly defensively, and we're still conceding goals, there really has to be a way that we set up that's a bit differently. In my personal opinion, I think we need to refresh that centre-back pairing. I wouldn't change them both, but I think Jorge Cuenca's done enough to warrant a start, as much as Bassey's had an indifferent start to the season. I also think that we've got to consider whether, just like last season, Anderson's form dropped when Tete was injured and out for a little while. Could we say the same thing about Bassey and Anthony Robinson not playing at all this season so far? His combinations with Cess not quite the same, because Cess is a lot more forward thinking and stays forward a bit more, stretching Bassey to his left a bit. Is that making him overthink what he needs to do, even with the ball or without the ball? I think there's a lot to consider with that, because Cuenca is probably a better baller, a player with the ball than Bassey, and certainly they're equal in terms of their defensive capabilities. I just think that, as Dan says, that Cuenca's earned the right to have a chance to start a few games, because he's never let us down. He's more than earned his place when he does start. But ultimately it comes down to organisation, it comes down to consistency. But Marco has trust issues, like that Dan was saying, that he trusts certain players more than maybe he ought to, and finds it hard to let go. So I think there has to be some changes. We've got to see what other combinations work, and also consider whether Bassey is struggling because he's so accustomed to Robertson's work off the ball. Maybe he's struggling with Cess being a bit more high up the pitch potentially.
Yeah, I'm a dreamer. I'm a football romanticist. I would much rather things be fun, and I do think that if we can't find a solution there, I'm okay with the solution therefore being, let's load up going forward. If we're going to resign ourselves to conceding at least a goal a game, we've got to make sure we're scoring 3 a game. And it could be super dangerous, right? But I would much rather watch that than us generate, like we did on Saturday, 0.4 XG, which is pathetic, really. And at least just go for it down the other end. If we're going to keep trying to win games 1-0 and eke over the line, it's not going to happen unless either something changes or players rediscover their form. And failing that, let's throw that out the window and let's go and try to score more goals.
Yasmin, from defence to attack then, I've asked the boys to solve our defensive problems. So this, for you, from Tommy Shep, where is the offence coming from in future matches?
Oh my God. I mean, there's not really an answer to it now, because Jimenez is really struggling to keep up with having so much reliance on him. Silva was making comments as well about how he's been very carefully watched by the medical staff over the last few weeks. We were all commenting on how the injury crisis seemed to suddenly disappear in one game, but it seems like it actually is still bubbling away under the surface. I don't actually think Jimenez was fully back to fitness, and obviously Muniz was not. It seems like both of them haven't really had a lot of involvement and engagement in training sessions during the week, and then have both been put on to play on Saturday. Jimenez is knackered. Muniz, it looks slightly dangerous, whatever situation he's in. It's disappointing that he had to go off so quickly. So something regarding a hamstring, like it just doesn't look good. And I cannot imagine we're going to be seeing JKA all that much. Like, how do you even answer that question? Because that is the reality that we have, in that we've relied so heavily on rotating and sort of substituting strikers that we have an issue when we only have one, let alone nearly none. So that's where I'm more worried. That seems like more of a dire situation than the defence, in my opinion. At least in defence we have options. We were discussing other options there. We were discussing putting in Cuenca or Diop or Robinson eventually, hopefully coming back. But in the striker position, there is no solution apart from just keeping Jimenez going until he just runs himself into the ground. Sorry, that was bleak.
It's like a Weekend at Bernie situation where you have to hold him up by like strings and see if he can manage until we get someone fit to actually play.
Yeah.
I guess a King, just like rely more on his attacking outlook. Okay, he's not going to be a striker, but it's someone who has a little bit more forward-thinking mindset and is sleek and exciting. It was so obvious when he came on at half-time. Allowing him and Iwobi to win that midfield, to take the pressure off Jimenez slightly, might help.
I think, yeah, Josh King and getting excited about him feels like the perfect place to wrap us up for today then. The last thing we've got to do, Avais, is name the podcast. Do you have a favourite 3-word review for us?
I do like Jay Sampson's awful, dreadful, abysmal, but I don't think it quite would be appropriate. So I think we're going to go with Rick Cardis's A Dickensian Nightmare.
Nice. Really, really nice. Thank you so much, Rick Cardis, for that, and for everyone for getting in touch with your questions and your 3-word reviews. And thank you so much to my panel today. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to do what I would recommend everyone do. Just take a football breather. We've all got over a week and a half to just forget about it. And I think that's the best thing we could do. Don't speak about Fulham. Don't think about Fulham. Let it go. And hopefully we come back and we can enjoy thinking about Fulham again.
It's quite wise advice in lots of ways. Avais, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. No, thank you for having me. It's been a nice, cathartic way to get out of that mindset I had in the car going home.
And Yasmin, thank you for coming back on.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's been lovely to be back, and I have the beauty of distance to forget about Fulham for 2 weeks.
Well, the good news is that you may want to forget about Fulham, but maybe you don't, because Fulhamish is back on Thursday or Friday with This Will Catch On, which will feel like the perfect antidote. For those not familiar, all our gorgeous listeners write in their chants and we rate or we slate. We're filming it on Wednesday. I'm literally so excited. And there are some absolute bangers in the inbox, according to Fred. So I cannot wait to be listening to them. And that will be in your ears towards the end of the week. And then we'll be back next week, Thursday Club, looking forward to Sunderland. We can't ever get off the horse for too long. Until then, take care and come on, you Whites.
You Whites.
You Whites.